Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa Allahu wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa sanadana wa shafi'ana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Amma ba'd. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما المؤمنون إخوة وقال الله تعالى في آية أخرى وتعاونوا على البر والتقوى وقال الله تعالى في آية أخرى وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So this talk, titled The Dynamic Power of Virtuous Company, in some ways I selected each word of this title deliberately. But before I begin this talk, I want all of us to remember the people of Gaza and Palestine. Those of you who are regular listeners on this platform would have seen in the last 12 months, most of my topics have been about Gaza and Palestine, and there has been very little other than that. And that is because I think that it remains and will continue to remain the most defining Muslim event that I've seen up till now in my lifetime. And Allahu Alam, there may be even worse events to come. At the same time, all of you would know that many ulama, shuyukh, du'at, speakers, lecturers have obviously been continuing to talk about other things. And I also from time to time have gone on a few trips to talk about other topics. But nonetheless, personally it was hard for me to return to other topics, but inshallah, today is a different topic. But really at this moment, we should all think about this incredible luxury that I'm sitting somewhere and you are sitting somewhere listening in the comfort of your home, with having all of your family members alive and safe near you, next to you, around you, and having no worry or threat of any kind whatsoever. And imagine now that it's almost going to be 1 year in a few weeks that not 1,000, not 100,000, but 3 million of our fellow mu'mineen and mu'minat, Muslimin and Muslimat have been living a life of absolute horror, absolute terror, war crimes, apartheid, genocide. These are all words in the English language that cannot even begin to capture the evil, the absolute profound and profane evil in this world, and how that evil has been directed towards the 3 million members of this Ummah, and now is also being directed to a few more million in the West Bank, and how that evil has been supported by hundreds of millions of people and governments in the world. Maybe it's not fair to attribute it to the people, but the governments in the world. And for a long time, I've actually had a lecture prepared, but I have not delivered it because, again, I feel this channel is not the right platform perhaps for these things. But the responsibilities of American Muslims, and in fact, the failure of American Muslims. And on the one hand, there's a practical... I don't want to... The whole talk will then become on this topic. But, on the one hand, people practically, quote-unquote, go on with their lives. And on the other hand, it's a feeling of compassion and empathy for members of the Ummah that we cannot go on with our own lives. And also I would have suggested, if that was the topic for today, we should not go on with our own lives. But there is one sense that we do have to continue our own journey, because all of us, no matter what is happening in the world, all of us is continuing to make our own individual life journey towards our qabr and towards Yawm al-Qiyamah and towards our akhirah. And no matter what horrors are going around in the world and what evil is being done to the Ummah, at the same time, simultaneously, you and me, each and every one of us, is living a life on our own individual personal lane of Sirat al-Mustaqim. And we may unfortunately not be able to control or have even an impact or even have an effect or even slightly influence things that are happening in other parts of the world. And sometimes one way to, if nothing else, to keep our sanity, but also to keep up our own mission of being an abd and a servant and slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to focus on our lane and see how we can do better in our life journey towards our maut. Especially, now that I'm also now actually well over 50. I feel I'm obviously just only a little bit over 50, but I feel well over 50, and means I'm very close to my qabr. And so this is a topic that those of you who know me for many years would know that at a personal level, this is something that I individually benefited a lot from in my 20s and 30s, and taught many people and guided many people and, stressed this topic to many people in their 20s and 30s. But then a question arises that what does this mean for a person who has entered their 40s and 50s? So I want to add that dimension, but I also want to treat this topic in a new way, partly to reflect some new understandings of this topic, and maybe subtly for those who have been listening to us for many years to undo some incorrect understandings of this topic. Virtuous company, the company of the Salihin, the company of Muttaqeen, is a dream that all of us have, and there's no doubt whatsoever in the Quran al-Kareem and the Hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and everything that I've also ever quoted from the Quran, from the Sunnah, and so many ulama and shuyukh have quoted from the Quran and Sunnah on this topic. All those ayat of Quran, all those ahadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam are all accurate, all valid, all mean precisely what is mentioned in the topic, that there are some believers out there who are salihin, sadiqeen, siddiqeen, muttaqeen, so many words Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for them in Quran. I'm just calling it, they're people who are virtuous. They have better characteristics than us. Their iman is stronger than us. Their iman, they might have certain attributes of iman more than we do. None of them can be perfect. None of them will be perfect. None of them should be expected to be perfect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not giving a certificate of perfection to anyone, even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His own regard and His infinite perfect knowledge deems that person to be amongst the muttaqeen mu'mineen. Even the muttaqeen mu'mineen are not perfect. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and I will review some of those verses in these shortly, mention is indeed being with such people is of benefit to ordinary believers, and that is you and me. And this is a truth that can never change. This is a timeless truth, because those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in Quran and Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam has mentioned authentic, authoritative, impactful, direct, clear meanings of hadith. They are timeless truths. And there's no one incident, no one person, no one century, nothing can change these time, no culture, no society, no personal experience, no personal proclivity, no person's personality that can change these entire truths. All right. The flip side of this, and that will be the next talk we give in this series, inshallah, is that in addition to being in company, very often a person finds himself alone, right? And that being alone is something that can be difficult. And sometimes we have to make a distinction between being alone and being lonely. So that would be a second topic. But the only way I want to link that to today is that there's a particular type of loneliness, and I'm going to describe sort of being alone in a different way, that when you're alone, you're actually in your own company. And if we're not virtuous people, if we're not muttaqeen, salihin, mu'mineen, we are not good suhbah for ourselves. What does that mean? That when we're alone, Because we are not dhakirin, muttaqeen, salihin, mu'mineen. When we are alone, we will end up doing mindless surfing, mindless scrolling, endless sleeping, overeating. This is our reality when we are alone. Now, many times people also are in another predicament that they'll say, okay, I acknowledge this about myself. I'm not good when I'm in my own sohbah. I'm not good when I'm in my own fellowship, my own companionship, my own company. But at the same time, I don't actually have good company, good companions, good fellows around me. So I have no choice really but to be alone. And some people, unfortunately, in this very desperately hard place, that the only company that is available to them might be of bad company. But I think that is letting oneself off the hook too easy. And I think it's a very important teaching of Deen that we are all in this together on Sirat al-Mustaqim, and you have to find and you have to create good company. Sometimes it also may happen to a person that a person is shy or reluctant or hurt or bitter or has resentment or has been scarred from different experiences, and therefore they're reluctant to try to seek out good company. So then again, they're alone, but again, that means they're in their own company. It means basically they're in the sohbat of screen, right? And so really understand that I think the way we need to revive this teaching of trying to find and benefit from the dynamic power of virtuous company is really to offset and protect ourselves from the very dynamic power of the company of the screen. That the screen has a powerful impact on us. It entices us, it ensconces us, it drags us into this world where we can spend endless and endless hours. Even now, tulab of ilm who truly, sincerely thought that they would spend the time outside class studying their deen, preparing their lessons of Quran and Hadith and fiqh and Arabic, etc., they get stuck in the company of the screen. Even tulab of hifz, thinking that they would revise their Quran, memorize their Quran, they get stuck on the screen. And I also want to point out, and not being academic for the sake of being academic, but to show you that there is a wider phenomenon out there in this world that people have been talking about for maybe really over a century, of modernity having this, being alone in a crowded world, really, is a simple way if I put it in very simple ways, right? So the world around you is very crowded, and everybody's mechanically going through the routine cycle of earning and recreation and earning and recreation, and they're passing years in this. And because of secularism and because of all the technology, and everything is mechanical and very few things are spiritual, let's put it that way, then even we find this affected our own ibadah. And then our own ibadah, our own worship, becomes mechanical instead of spiritual. And then you do interact with people, but those bonds, they're not warm, they're not nourishing, they're not strengthening, they're not mutually reinforcing, because they're not spiritual bonds. They're not what Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam described in Hadith as lillah or fillah, al-mutahabbuna fillah, that those who mutually love one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of their fellowship of journeying on the Sirat al-Mustaqim and trying to be the abd and the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't have bonds like that. We don't have company like that. And this is why, and you've heard this many times, and it's absolutely true, that the reason why we call that very first generation, and everybody calls them by this one word, even Orientalists and even critics of Islam will call them the companions, the Sahaba of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And even really, if you ask me, the Tabi'een are the ones who had the sohbah of the Sahaba, right? And this notion of interaction, this notion of connection, this notion of mutual engagement and relationship is the very foundation of our deen. In fact, whenever Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned hadith, the blessings of the first three generations, which later then, because the Prophet didn't exactly use this term, but later became in the Muslim world to simply be called the Salaf Salihin, that is because they all kept the company of each other from the first to the second to the third generation of Sahaba, Tabi'in, and Tabai Tabi'in. So this good company, virtuous company, is a necessary rizq for our ruh. It is a necessary nourishment for our ruh, and our ruh is starved. And just like they say, in nutrition, you have to have a balanced diet and eat from these different food groups. And it's a very baby way to explain it. But just like that, our ruh also needs a balanced diet. There's something that the ruh gets from your individual ibadah. There's something the ruh gets from boosts like Ramadan and Umrah. And there's something distinct that the ruh gets from virtuous fellowship, virtuous companionship. And those of us who have ever experienced that and tasted that know know the uniqueness and almost the irreplaceability of that special benefit. And those who have lost it will also know the irreplaceability and uniqueness of that special benefit. Because this is actually a reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed us in, that none of us can be mustaghni. None of us are self-sufficient. None of us can be independent. This is only the sha'an, the splendor and majesty uniquely of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is al-ghani and al-mustaghni. None of us can have that level of istighna, which means that, being so strong independently on oneself that you have no dependence, no need on another. None of us can have that. So really, sometimes I used to say to be human is to, when we used to give these talks on Quranic humanism and identity, to be human is to be the slave of Allah. To be human is to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will put it in a different way. To be human is to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be human is to have a Nabi. To be human is to have a God, right? To be the God, La ilaha illallah, the one and only God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be human is to have a Nabi, to have a prophet. Every human being has been assigned to a prophet. From the time of Adam alayhi salam until the last Adam, and alhamdulillah, we are blessed to have been assigned to Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. To be human is to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be human is to have a Nabi. And to be human is to have an Ummah. It's another part I want to add. It's part of what it means to be a human, because once you're assigned to a prophet, then you are assigned to the ummah of that prophet. So it means to be human is to have an ummah. And again, this is how we have failed. Really, I tell you, especially being a Muslim in America, born in America, living in America, I don't know how any and every Muslim in America is going to answer on the Day of Judgment for what's happening in Gaza. I know people, we're not directly responsible. Maybe we're not at all responsible, but still, and certainly we have, this concept of ummah has totally failed when it comes to protecting. And what is the value really? I don't want to enter on the topic again, but what is the value of an ummah if you can't even protect your children? I'm not talking about reviving khilafah. I'm not talking about strategic power. You can't even protect your children and babies. Allahu Akbar. What would somebody say about a parent, right? A video parent. I'm a father. Okay, maybe the father didn't make the most money or leave the greatest estate or do this, but he can't even protect his own young children. People say that we have to fail that person. He cannot be a father. Khair. So, to be human is to have an ummah. So now, there is a i'tidal or a balance. There's a balance. If you have the right company, then you are able to be the right way when you're alone. And if you don't have the right company and you don't have the benefit of virtuous company, often a person is wrong. Finds himself in a very wrong place, in a disturbed place when they're alone. So sukoon, itminan, peace, tranquility, serenity comes when one has itidal and balance, and when one is salih, virtuous and correct in both their company and when they are alone. All right. So now let's start first with the bad company. And by bad company, I don't just mean, an individual. I want to first start with media, culture, society. And even if you're living in the Muslim world, the media, culture, society is very, very far from the Muslim values, the Muslim virtues, the Muslim adab and akhlaq. And so outright we are beginning this journey drowning in a sea of ghafla, drowning in a sea of fitna. And when you remain close when you closely guard yourself and you remain in close-knit Muslim circles and communities. I often tease the Gujaratis of UK and South Africa, but things are far from rosy when you peel the skin off of that, but still outwardly, apparently, in certain communities. But the reality is, but for Muslims in America, there's nothing like that, right? And Alhamdulillah for Deen of Islam, because when you interact with non-Muslims, you realize the incredible fitna. The world has become a place. I think this was not always true, but the world has become a place that if you don't have Iman, you don't have Islam, it's actually a horrific, horrendous, depressing life that these human beings live. They might outwardly, apparently, have, jobs and careers, but there's no sense of fulfillment. There's no sense of, it's a ajib life. It's a very ajib life. Especially those who live in cities or are caught up in the rat race of this world. Maybe not so true for those who live in rural areas or leading less ambitious lives. But the mu'min and the Muslim is deeply affected by this media. And social media is the biggest thing. I don't even need to talk about this or explain this aspect. I just wanted to highlight it. What I want to say about this is that we have become unaware as to how constant and how deep we are in sohbah of media. And we have become unaware of the deep impact it has on us. You'll understand this, for example, if for 10 days in itikaf you turn off your phone, or at any weekend even. And it's really important to do this sometimes. And then you will realize what an effect this has and how different. For some of us, you will actually be a different person. Your behavior, your personality will be more natural when you disconnect and unplug from the media. So here, that is one aspect of bad sohbah. The second aspect of bad sohbah is obviously other insan. This, I think, is a topic that sometimes is a bit overstressed. And the reality is that even if there are bad people around you and your friends or family or colleagues at work or whatever it may be, it's actually not responsible for you or I doing sin. That responsibility falls entirely upon us. But at the same time, remember this authentic hadith of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that good company, and he gave this very beautiful example, very famous hadith, right? And I'll just summarize it for you in English, that the good company is the likeness of that person who walks into the shop of the person selling fragrance, the attar, and even if you don't buy fragrance from him or you don't apply any fragrance, just being in that shop, when you walk away, some of that fragrance will have rubbed off on you. And the opposite was the example Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave of bad company, that when you're around bad company, it's like if you were in the forge of the blacksmith or the ironsmith, and that even if you don't touch the hot iron or you don't pick up a hot coal, but still the heat and the soot of the furnace will definitely affect you, and you will walk away. You cannot walk away untouched. And this is a very powerful example that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave about fleeting company, right? You just walk into a shop or you walk into a forge or a furnace and you're just there for a few moments. Then the other end of the spectrum, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave of intense prolonged company. There's another very well known and also authentic hadith, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi, that the person will be on the deen of their khalil, their most intimate, close, long-standing companion and friend. And therefore each and every one of you, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, should consider carefully man yukhalil, who you choose to take as your mutual best friend. So that's another extreme, right? That's another end of the spectrum. That's deep, prolonged company. So even momentary company has an impact, and deep, prolonged company has an impact. So then maybe it's not overstated, and we should not underestimate, even if we have a fleeting interaction with somebody who may not have the nur of Iman in their heart, or may not be striving to get the nur of taqwa in their heart. Now, let me along the way sort of explain some of the remedies for this. So, for social media, remedy is really as little as possible. The only person who I've seen can do this successfully is, and there are very few people who can do this, is if you sort of follow, you lose it for some very systematic learning. So maybe a person is taking a course, or maybe somebody has made a YouTube playlist and they're systematically going through that list. But most people, even if they do that, when whatever, noble reason, beneficial reason, they, logged on the internet for whenever that ends, they stay on, they linger, and they end up falling in some ghafla. So really the only cure I've really seen is if a person never goes on screen alone. And, for many years we've been saying for children, but I would now say it for myself and for all adults, that the screen should just be in the public room. The phone should be turned off. There should be some Wi-Fi control that controls these things, because it's very, very hard to be on the screen when you're alone and not slide into ghafla. Even reading, futile news stories, sports scores, even just waste of time, let alone outright sin. Okay. The second way, and these are only two ways I've seen somebody been saved from this. Well, I guess there are three. The second way is that somebody is so busy in their life. Maybe they're busy because they have a very intense, difficult job. Maybe they're busy because, mashallah, they're doing a lot of work of khidmat and dawat of deen, but they're so busy, they just don't have time for the social media. So I would also stress to people that if you're not able to save yourself from the fitna or sin of digital media, then make yourself so busy, even if it's jaiz dunya. Even if you cannot make yourself busy in deen, that's ideal, but otherwise make yourself so busy in jaiz dunya that you don't have the time to fall into ghafla, fitna, and sin on media. The third is a very rare type of person who is either such a simple, humble believer or such a pious, virtuous believer that alhamdulillah they're strong enough to resist the ghafla that is available on social media. Okay, the second thing, we were talking about bad company. So there's two types of bad company, one that is in your ikhtiyar, one that is in your choice, and the second that is not in your choice. If it's in your choice, gradually reduce it, and if it's not in your choice, then you have to make some istighfar, make some dua, recite some Quran, spend some additional time in the masjid, and we're going to come to that when we talk about good company. You have to adopt some good company to undo that. So just think like the hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What would be maybe the easiest, quickest, best thing for that person who walks out of the blacksmith, the ironsmith, furnace and forge? What could he do to immediately undo, right, the heat and the stench and the soot of the furnace? Would just go next door to the store of the attar, go next door to the perfume store and just spend a few minutes there, right? And so think like that. Think like that. If you have furnaces that you cannot remove yourself from, then increase the amount of fragrant environments that you spend time in. I'll just say it now rather than say it. I will say it again later, inshallah. And one could be the masjid. Simply then going to the masjid more for salah, or staying back after salah, or going early for salah, or staying from fajr to ishraq, or from maghrib to isha, or any time that you have. Maybe a person only has time at dhuhr, staying a few minutes after dhuhr, staying a few minutes after asr, and even literally doing hisab of it. That, today I just use an American example. Today I was in the subway, and for 10 minutes these two people were standing right next to me. It was a crowded subway. I couldn't stand anywhere else, and they were, dressed in a fitna way, or they even, in New York City, they were doing fitna things with each other right there in public. In 10 minutes I had to stand there. No matter how much I lowered my gaze, I knew what was going on. Okay, so that was not in your ability, right? To undo something like that, it may take much more than 10 minutes in the masjid, but the point is, view it as an effect that has taken place and something that you have to undo. You see, what would happen? Let's take Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hadith literally. If me and you went into a furnace and we were affected by the heat and the smoke and the soot of the ironsmith's forge, we would come out, go home, take a shower, and change our clothes. We would do something. We would take corrective measures. So either you take preventive measures, it's in your ikhtiyar, it's in your ability, avoid it, escape it if you're stuck in it. And if you can't do that, then you have to take corrective measures. This is a good way, maybe in English, preventive or corrective. Corrective measures. You have to do something to remediate that. All right? It's very important because we take it for granted. That, well, what can I do? I work in a place, my colleagues dress like this, or they behave like this, or in my commute, I have to see this. And what can I do? Fine, you can't. What you can do is you can do something to undo that, to forget that, to wipe that away from your heart. All right. The other bad sohbat is the bad sohbat of our nafs. And this is what I meant, that the very evil, all of us are good and evil. It would be nice that when we are alone, we have the sohbah of our good side. And that would make us maybe pray salah, recite Quran, make dua for the people of Gaza and Philistine, etc. Unfortunately, what happens to many of us, I would say most of us, is when we're alone, we end up in the sohbah of our bad side. Starts with the side that's lazy, right? It doesn't go, it's not the outright evil side. It's not our inner shaitan. It's just our laziness. And our laziness leads us to ghafla, in the name of recreation, entertainment, relaxing, downtime, me time. We have so many ways, euphemisms for this in the English language. And then when we surf and we're on the screen, Allahu Akbar, and it never ends. And this is a never-ending topic, and because nothing has changed about this digital world. You'll watch something for 20 minutes, again you will feel empty, you want to watch something for more. You look at your clock, you think, should I sleep? Maybe I could get up early for tahajjud this time instead of waking up for fajr. No, you will surf another 1 hour. And then you will think, oh, how can I never wake up for fajr salah? How can I never wake up for tahajjud? Well, you just surfed 1 extra hour at night, and therefore you slept 1 hour later. It's just pure math. If you hadn't surfed that 1 extra hour, you'd have slept 1 hour earlier. You could have woken up 1 hour earlier. So the amount of sleep would have stayed the same. So a lot of it is our choices. And this is something I've repeated, and something that I will tell you is a lifelong battle. What you do from the time of Isha Salah, and by that I mean the time of Isha Adhan, when the time of Isha starts. I'm not saying but when you pray it, because some people delay their Isha Salah. From the time that Isha starts, the time that the prayer of Isha enters, till the time that you sleep. This is the golden time to work on. People think, no, I want to work on the last third of the night. Tahajjud. You fix this first third of the night, everything else will fall into place. That's a much higher level. People are talking about last third of the night. For you and me, it's all about the first third of the night. First third. And all of you know, this is exactly where we fall into this fitna of media, and we fall into the fitna of our own nafs. Most people do most of their sins actually in the first third of the night. This is just my own statistic. All right? And then yes, sometimes it can even happen, al-aman al-hafiz, that sometimes we're alone. We actually end up in the soba of our own inner shaitan. Our own inner shaitan. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned something along these lines in Quran al-Kareem about having our own inner shaitan, but it's a very interesting long tafsir of what that is. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّدْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. This Surah Zukhruf, Surah 43, verse number 36. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whoever does not value, does not esteem, belittles, means in a more simple English, does not practice dhikr rahman. And again, alhamdulillah, the Mufassirun have explained this deeply. It's not just the dhikr, the remembrance of all merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is that, but also can mean the Quran al-Kareem, also can mean obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can also in the wider context mean about even iman. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah ta'ala in all His might and majesty appoints for such a person, nuqayyid lahu shaitanan, appoints for that person a shaitan. فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ, and that shaitan becomes for that person a qareen, a deep, intimate companion. Now some people have taken this to the black magic arts, and it means exactly what it says. Right? Allahu Akbar. In other words, there's shaitan, and the shayateen are constantly working on a person with waswasa to distract them from Sirat al-Mustaqim. But this is ajib. This is not shaitan sending one of his shayateen. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself as a punishment for this person. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is appointing for that person. A qareen, a shaitan who will be their qareen. And if you ever find, and I want to stress this especially maybe to younger men, well, really anybody from any gender, any age, who falls into particular sins on the internet, if you wonder why you fall into that sin successively and repeatedly, it's because the first couple of times you fell into it, you overcame your shame so that you could do it in a shameless way. And when you started doing it in that sin, any sin, in a shameless way, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment can come such that He appoints a particular individual shaitan for you who is so intimately near to you that he is a qareen. It means he's like completely, it's like muqarin, he's completely, intertwined and wrapped around you. Just think like that. Think like a snake is wrapped around your spiritual heart, your ruh. Allahu Akbar. And that's why then you just continue mindlessly and shamelessly to repeat that sin. Al-Aman al-Hafiz. And anybody who finds himself in this situation, they should flee from ever being alone. Never let oneself be alone if you find yourself in this situation. And then, in another place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that on the day of judgment, what will happen? This is Surah Qaf, Surah 50, verse 27. The end of the story. What is the end of the story of the person who fell into sin so shamelessly? That's one meaning I'm taking of this verse. That verse also meant a person who might outright deny Iman or outright disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many meanings of وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ. But what is the end of this person who has a shaitan as a qareen? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in a different place in the Quran, Surah Qaf, Surah 50, verse 27. قَالَ قَرِينُهُ, that person's qareen, remember that shaitan who is appointed as qareen, says, رَبَّنَا أَطْغَيْتُهُ وَلَكِنْ كَانَ فِي ضَلَالٍ بَعِيدٍ. He will say to Allah Ta'ala, and he will call Allah Ta'ala as his Rabb. He will say, my Rabb, our Rabb, I did not cause him to rebel. It wasn't me. وَلَكِنْ كَانَ فِي ضَلَالٍ بَعِيدٍ. Kana has the dhamir, and it means instead he himself was in outright manifest far. Ba'id is like widely gone in error. It wasn't me, it was him. Allahu Akbar. So this is the end, and this is just an example of this is the end of all bad suhbah on the day of judgment. Alright. Now let's move to the virtuous company. The virtuous company. Alright. So the first part I want to do in this virtuous company, I'll explain it in Urdu once, then I will say it in English. Jo sohbat hai, usko achhi banao, phir aur achhi sohbat ko talash karo. The company that you already are in, the relationships that you are already in, transform them in a way that company is a means of virtue for each other, and then seek more virtuous company. So you'll understand when I give the example. What is the meaning of good company? Number one, your parents. In other words, good company doesn't always mean to search for people who you don't yet know. Might be an ustad, might be a friend, might be a teacher, might be an imam. Good company starts by making the relationships you're in sources of virtue. And the first thing is parents. Spend more time with your parents if you are lucky enough and blessed enough by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that your parents are alive. Have more adab, have more respectful manners towards your parents. Do more khidmah, be of more service to your parents. Just even call your parents more or write your parents more, whatever, email, text them more. Be more in touch with your parents. Spend more time with your parents. And there's another big fitna of modernity, that people are so busy, or people live far away from their parents, or they only meet the parents once a week, or they talk to the parents. And I would say, especially for anyone, and I'm also in this category, anybody who has, let's say, kind of like a regular routine, right? So some people, they say, oh, every Sunday we have lunch with my mother, or they will say something like that. Whatever the regular routine is, alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala grant you istiqamah on that, but sometimes do more. Let's say you only meet your mom every Sunday for lunch. Show up one day on Wednesday, after work, just surprise her, right? Increase the sohbah with the parents. And this, I think, is something that so many of us have neglected. Some people neglect it. The people of the dunya neglect it in the name of dunya. In other words, they neglect their parents because of their job, career, profession. And some of us who are trying to be on deen, some of us, we ended up neglecting our parents in the name of deen, or rather in a distorted misunderstanding of what deen is. So, okay, not spending time with parents because you were busy studying deen, or teaching deen, or preaching deen, or traveling for deen, or whatever it may be. So the first virtuous company that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put, what in our deen we call birrul walidain, is to be a person of, and actually literally that Arabic word in English means virtue, to be a virtuous piety with your parents. Second is children. If Allah Ta'ala has blessed a person with children, to spend more time with the children. And again, many of us, we have made a weekly routine that, okay, we take them to this soccer game, or we do take them to the masjid for this class, or there's certain things that we do, alhamdulillah, that are set on the schedule. Do more, do extra. Sometimes, because when you have some extra time, it's only when you start giving it to your parents and children, and another category is coming, spouse. It's only when you start giving your extra time to parents, children, spouse, then Allah Ta'ala, inshallah, will give you tawfiq to give extra time to ibadah, dhikr, dua, salawat, and then you will be saved from giving all your extra time to screen. But this, just think, is one summary phrase if you want for today. And we made the mistake is that we don't give any extra time to parents, children, and spouse. We like to listen to talks and dream about how we're going to give all of our extra time to deen. And we end up, therefore, giving all of the extra time to screen. Right? So spend more time with the children. Yes, also definitely spend more time in the ta'aleem and tarbiyah of the children. But also just spend more time with the children. I mean play, social, friendly, not even just strictly necessarily deeni ta'aleem and tarbiyah. And third thing is spend more time with the spouse. Now what happens as a person gets older, you have multiple children, you move across later stages of life, the relationship with the spouse can become more like co-household manager, right? Co-parent, co-daughter-in-law, son-in-law, each, taking, being respectful of each other's parents, and co-household managers, co-children, tarbiyat, ta'aleem givers, and it's, just the pure spousal relationship sometimes gets forgotten. So to spend more time with one spouse. And remember how Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the very first place he went to after Hira, no matter how much you love Abu Bakr, you cannot say he went to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq without an anhu. No matter how much you love Sayyidina Ali, you cannot say that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, right after Iqra, the first revelation, that he went running to Sayyidina Ali. You cannot say he went running to any of his uncles. He went straight to Mu'mineen Sayyidah Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Now he went straight to her spouse. He went straight to his spouse, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Allahu Akbar. Why? Because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran al-Kareem for all of us, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you might get sukoon from your spouse and be a source of sukoons for your spouse. So it's everything, husband for wife, wife for husband. To be mutual sukoon. Now just look at the title again. The dynamic power of virtuous company if you're married. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran that your spouse is supposed to be a source of sukoon, and you should be a source of sukoon for your spouse. And if you can't do that first lesson, how are you going to get quote unquote dynamic power of quote unquote virtuous other people's company? And then also remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran al-Kareem when he was talking about spouses that he placed mawadda and rahmah between the spouses. And some mistake sometimes some of us make is that we look for love and affection outside the marriage. Maybe, no doubt, there are many times that people are having marital issues, marital problems. But just think that if you try to seek for that love and affection outside marriage, you might find it, but it's not where Allah Ta'ala wants you to find it. And it's not where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed it for you. And so you have to be strong and suppress that human need and desire and wish for that love and affection elsewhere. And you have to seek and find it from your own spouse. So this was the first part of good sohbat, which I said that the company that Allah Ta'ala has already placed you in, value that. And again, I will say it. If you start giving some of your extra time to your parents, children, and spouse, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward and bless you by enabling you, giving you tawfiq to give some of your extra time to Him and His ibadah and to the learning and service and practice of His deen. And when you have these two things, it will then save you from giving all of your extra time to screen. And you can flip the equation and check it on yourself. That if am I giving all of my extra time to screen? And if I am, clearly then it's established that I don't give any extra time to my parents, children, or spouse. I'm not able to give any of my extra time to deen. Alright. Now then, after this core virtuous company, we move to a second category of virtuous company, which is on the basis of deen alone. It's not family, right? On the basis of deen alone. Here, normally, and I'm sure many times I did this as well in the past 10, 20, 30 years, the person will meet the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about virtuous company in deen is a Shaykh. Allahu Akbar. So let's hold off on that for a moment. The first virtuous company is their words Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used in Quran al-Kareem. Number one, yateem. Allahu Akbar. So many times, just Google it. I didn't Google it for today, but anybody can search this now. How many times this word has come in Quran al-Kareem? And how many times you take all the words combined that you think might be equivalent to Shaykh, and see how many times that comes in Quran. Yateem. And just expand this, right? Yateem, faqir, miskeen. So the orphan, the poor, the needy, the widows, the refugees. And another word that comes in Quran al-Kareem in different words, but also the word madloom, the muttar, the oppressed. So this makes this a whole category. Poor, needy, orphan, widow, refugee, oppressed. This is the category. And if you have zero sohbah of any of them, literally, there are so many people, so many Muslims, who if I was to ask them, okay, who give me from this category? Is there any one? Is there one widow who, okay, maybe you financially support her, or maybe you do her groceries for her, or maybe you just, ask your wife to visit her, every now and then, or if she's maybe 70, 80 years old, you even, try to be of some service to her. Is there one widow? One. Is there one orphan? One, just one, right? Is there one poor person that you're helping in any way, right? Whether it's training them with some skill, helping them with some income. Is there one refugee? Is there one cause? Right? Maybe individual oppressed person. Is there one cause where you're trying to fight injustice and oppression? One, at least one in each column. I'm not even going to let ourselves off the path that from all of them pick one. No, from all of the above pick one. So I'm going to repeat them again. Orphan, widow, poor, right? Fakir, miskin, poor, needy person, whatever, that's a category. And fourth is some person suffering from injustice, oppression. Could be refugee. That's an example. 4 categories: widow, orphan, poor, and oppressed. One each. And it's not just money, they also need friendship. They also need fellowship. They also need a demonstration that there are other members of the Ummah who feel and care about me. Right? So this is the first category I'm going to mention here in terms of good company in Deen. Second category of good company in Deen is to have friends and fellow, you can say fellow students if you're studying Deen, fellow seekers, fellow learners, fellow travelers on the path. Yes, this is that golden category of friendship. So I'm not even still far from quote unquote Shaykh or Shaykhdom, as sometimes it perhaps should be called, like there were kings who had a kingdom. Sometimes there are sheikhs who have sheikhdoms. So the second category of Deen is friendship, fellowship. And that's actually what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَتَوَاصُوا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصُوا بِالصَّبْرِ تَعَاوُنَ عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. These are mutual relationship between friends, between peers, between fellows, between colleagues. So you should have friends with Deen, and that, yes, a major part of it doesn't mean friends with Deen who I play basketball with them. No, don't. I'm not saying it at that more social level. I mean friends with Deen who you mutually advise and support one another on Deen, about Deen, for the sake of learning and practicing Deen, not for anything else. Okay, might be, you might also have the social thing, but first and foremost, primarily for Deen. This is very important. And this is one benefit of institutions, whether it's institution of Islamic learning or any type of gathering. And maybe one of the greatest things about Muslim schools and Islamic institutes of learning is they provide the opportunity and space for those friendships and fellowships to flower and prosper, inshallah. And this, the greatest story of this is from the Sahaba Kiram radiyallahu ta'ala an mujmain. And the greatest story in this is number one, the friendship between, what was the greatest friendship in the whole history of humanity? Was the friendship between As-Siddiq, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and Ar-Rasul, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Because there was a friendship, a fellowship there. And all of you know the famous story when Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam was doing the hijrah and in the cave, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was with him in the cave. And just remember again, what was that? That was Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq traveling with him with a worry to protect his life from the enemies of the believers, right? And it's interesting, at that time, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we think, looking back, looking at the whole seerah, of course, the Prophet ﷺ would have had to have survived because there was still a lot of work to be done to establish Deen on earth as the final and everlasting religion. So Allah Ta'ala would have surely made something happen, because if, na'udhu billah, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam had been martyred in Makkah Mukarramah, or they caught him in the cave, then how would it have happened and what would happen in history? We can think all of that, but Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, he was not thinking that at that time. At that time, he really, truly, genuinely was afraid that his beloved Prophet, his beloved friend, and the Nabi of the Deen would pass away, would be martyred, killed by the enemy. Allahu Akbar. So he's extremely worried. Extremely worried. And as you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent wahi, and is described, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself wants to tell this story. This is how I would explain it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself wants to tell this story. إِذْ هُمَا فِي الْغَارِ إِذْ يَقُولُ لِلصَّاحِبِهِ. There's the word in Quran itself, sahib. So when the two of them, yani Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala were in the cave, and when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to his friend, his sahib, his companion, yani Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, he said what? La tahzan, do not worry, do not fret. Inna Allaha ma'ana, that indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. Now that's almost like you can say a sunnah of friendship. What is the sunnah of friendship? One sunnah of friendship is for one friend to support the other friend and remind them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what happens if that sunnah of friendship is followed? What happened then can still happen now. فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَيْهِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His sakina, yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent tranquility from Himself, alayhi, onto, it's a singular, onto him, singular, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an. Wa ayyadahu, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped him in this mission of protecting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, bijunudin lam tarawha, with armies and hosts, yani means of angels, that cannot be seen. And then, what was the real worry of Sayyidina Abu Bakr? Remember I told you that Nabuwwat, the deen has to come. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also addresses this in the same ayah. وَجَعَلَ كَلِمَةَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا السُّفْلَى. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made, it literally means the kalima, right? It means the creed of disbelief of those who disbelieved, as-sufla, to be abased and to be, maghlub. وَكَلِمَةُ back to the ayah, وَكَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ هِيَ الْأُلْيَا. And the kalima of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creed of those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but literally means the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be ulya, will be uppermost, will supersede. Wallahu azizun hakim, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is almighty, all wise. Allahu Akbar. So all this also shows you the concerns of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiyallahu anhu. Concern for his friend, Sahib, concern for him as a Nabi, concern for the deen that Nabi has brought. All those concerns were in his heart. It's a ajib ayah, testament to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiyallahu anhu, but also a testament that what is friendship? That I'm your friend, I'm concerned for you, that you don't have grief. I'm concerned that I want you to, and I'm going to combine both sides of the friendship, the Nabi side and the Siddiq side, into one portrayal of what friendship is. Friendship is that I'm concerned that my friend does not worry, that my friend remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah ta'ala should send His sakina in the heart of my friend, that my friend should be helped by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Allah ta'ala's unseen means, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this friendship will preserve this friendship and make this friendship a means for the kalima of kufr to be sufla and for the kalimatullah to be ulya. This is friendship. Allahu Akbar. So this is what it means to have dini friendship. This is not a classic Shaykh Murid relationship. This is a two-way, mutual, reinforcing, nurturing, loving relationship. Yes, there might be one who is a slightly more elder and one might be slightly junior, but that's it. Okay, then, what is the next greatest friendship? Allahu Akbar. That is the friendship between Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu and Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala an. Allahu Akbar kabira. Another beautiful friendship. And these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved live for us in Medina Munawwara. You go to Masjid Nabawi, you will see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants that in this earth, one friend is resting next to one friend, An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and As-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an. And then another friend is resting right next to another friend who's next to As-Siddiq is Al-Faruq radiyallahu ta'ala an. Ajib. And then you get that beautiful thing in that when you go to Medina Munawwara, Al-Mar'u ma'aman ahabba, that a person will be whom they love. And in English, how I would put this, that a friend of a friend is a friend. Allahu Akbar. And you just look at those three. Ar-Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, As-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an, Al-Faruq radiyallahu ta'ala an. A friend of a friend of a friend. And when you go there, you stand there. This is the benefit of going there. No other religion has this. You know that? No other religion on earth has this. The Jews cannot go visit and say salam to Musa Islam. The Christians cannot visit and go say salam to Isa Islam. The Buddhists cannot go visit and say salam to Buddha. You understand? Allah Ta'ala blessed you and me that we can go visit and say salam to Ar-Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and As-Siddiq and Al-Faruq Radiallahu An. This is how much Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala honored this friendship. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala wants it. If you come and say salam to Ar-Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you will also then should say salam to As-Siddiq, because if there was no As-Siddiq, you, O believer of 2024, you would have never known Ar-Rasul. And if there was no Al-Faruq, you also, O believer, would never have been able to know Ar-Rasul. Allahu Akbar. Achieve friendship between the two of them. You know, some people don't even know the story of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. It's a delicate period of history, but when Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away, then what happened? The Ansar, they got together and they wanted to appoint a leader of the whole Ummah, but from amongst themselves, because, let me explain it in a very simple way, because they wanted to continue the tradition that even after Fateh Makkah, Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam returned to Medina Munawwara, did not make, so to speak, the capital of Islam, Makkah Mukarramah, but he chose to return to Medina Munawwara. So by that the Ansar had felt, and this was their understanding, which was genuine and sincere on their part, that Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had then preferred Medina Munawwara to Makkah Mukarramah, and hence preferred Medina Munawwara as the political capital over Makkah Mukarramah, and hence Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would have preferred one of the Ansar to take the mantle of leadership. And then what they had to do was figure out from amongst themselves which one it should be. Alright, so they nominated one Sahaba. Then Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, because they had the vision that the spread of Islam is not done after Fateh Makkah Medina Munawwara, but rather we have to now take over the entire Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere. And for that to happen, the leadership must be amongst the Muhajir of Quraysh. So then they went to that meeting, and then Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, he presented somebody else, not his own self, right? Somebody else from the Muhajirun. And then Sayyidina Umar, he saw that, okay, this is now looking up, this is his wisdom, that he saw apparently this is going to very quickly, the surat, right? This wasn't the haqiqat. The reality wasn't that there was any factionalism at that moment between the Muhajir and Ansar, but he had the wisdom to see that it's going to look like that. It's going to look like this party, faction, Ansar has a nominee, and the Muhajirun are going to look like a party and faction that they have a nominee. So this is going to look like factionalism. So he quickly grabbed the hand of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, because he knew that everybody would accept him. And because he is a Siddiq, he has a status that is greater than that of a Muhajir or Ansar. He transcends these categories. He is the ultimate Siddiq and beloved friend of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he will never seek this office for himself. So Sayyidina Umar, he grabbed his hand and he proclaimed his allegiance to him, and then all the Muhajirun and Ansar, they just followed suit. Allahu Akbar. So now the greatness of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. But then what did Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala do, which was a most incredible act of friendship? He served. When Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq was Amir al-Mu'mineen Khalifatul Rasul, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu served him as loyally, as lovingly, as truly as he served Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with no distinction. This is my statement. Because why? Because these friendships are lideen and lillah and fillah. And so if the relationship is lideen, lillah, fillah, it doesn't matter. Sayyidina Umar didn't feel that, oh, how can I be second place or be a deputy to the deputy? No. And here, because of that unique self-sacrificing attribute, then Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu nominated him after to be the Khalifatul Rasul after him. So these are the two greatest examples of friendship. And so what was that second example was that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu supporting his friend Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu during the latter's Khilafatul Rashida, during that 2 years that he was Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, so this shows the first thing I wanted, that there should be a few special friends in our life, because not all of your friends you're going to be Khalil with, right? A deep, intimate companion. The second thing, now we come to the famous verse, Kunu ma sadiqin, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa kunu ma sadiqin, that O you who believe have taqwa and be with the sadiqin. Now, what does this really mean? The word sadiqin is in plurality. Sometimes, we were taught, and we also used to teach this grammatical trick, which is that kunu is plural and sadiqin is plural, and when you do the muqabal of the jama, it means taqsimul fard ala al-fard. But here, that is just a grammatical trick. I think it truly means that all of you should be with all of the sadiqin. What does it mean? Maybe it could also mean one person, and you don't need this verse to establish this notion of taking a teacher of tazkiyah. All right? So you don't have to stretch it out or squeeze it out from this verse. But fine, no problem. Let's say, because there are some mufassirun who have actually also said it, so who am I to counter that? So maybe it can also mean each of you be with one of the sadiqeen, but it cannot negate the plurality aspect either, so it definitely means do both. Both means that you should be with a lot of sadiqeen. This is one of the benefits of going to the masjid for salah. In one sense, like let's say you go for Isha Jama'ah in the masjid, in one sense all those people are sadiqeen in this meaning that they all chose to pray salah in the masjid in Jama'ah instead of at home. Or you go to any dars, any lesson of Quran, lesson of hadith, lesson of seerah, lesson of dhikr, lesson of taqwa, lesson of tawbah, whatever the topic may be. And you're sitting with people because they're also sadiqeen, because all of them also came with talab and desire to hear that so they could change their life. So to attend religious gatherings, to be with the religious company, multiple people, to surround yourself, this is what's one of the things about tawaf. You just go and you're one of many people doing tawaf around Baytullah. It's just a lovely experience. Sometimes a person might think, I wish I could have the mataf. I have actually never thought this, but I'm going to roleplay this out live. I wish I could have the mataf all to myself. I mean, you might think that about multazim, but no, you won't think that about the mataf. You want to be with other people. You want to be with fellow believers. This is, again, a deen of ummah. To be human is to have that ummah. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. So the ibadah, na'budu, we together. Nasta'in, the need we have for Ya Allah, your help, we have that together. It's not just a one-to-one thing. So that's why it's very important to go to gatherings, going to halakas, going to durus, going to bayan, going to majlis, whatever term you want to use for it. And then if there's siddiqeen who are going out or sadiqeen who are going out for dawah, to go out in groups for dawah, to go out in groups and do relief work and humanitarian work. Simply speaking, it means to be part of collective efforts, collective gatherings. Kunu ma sadiqeen. Okay, and then the other major teaching from Quran that we know, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And what this means is that when believers try to support one another on deen, another model, if we're building this Islamic model of friendship, is to support one another on haqq. Never let that person have doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fall into faithlessness, fall into heedlessness, to remind and reinforce one another about haqq, and to also realize that a second thing is sometimes it's not about haqq. We know it's true, we completely have yaqeen. It's just that we've become weak, we become lazy, we don't have the strength to fight the good fight against our nafs anymore. So وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Sabr means to have fortitude and perseverance. And sometimes it also means that I have setbacks in my life, and those setbacks in my life have hurt me so much. I feel so hurt and so weak that I can't lift myself up for even my own ibadah or for deen. And so again, the friend is there with tawassul bis-sabr. Here, sabr means to exhort that person and mutually enjoin upon that person to have patience. Remember, la tahzan, that first principle of friendship. إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ. So don't have that grief. So it's not just, this wasn't just a unique relationship between Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa an sa'ir sahabati ajma'in. This is between all of us and between individual ones of us. Now to show you the ultimate, that this friendship is so universal in our deen. There's a place in the Quran, and many of you know this already because it's in Surah Kahf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, in a way, tells Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that even he, notwithstanding that he has a special friendship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even he will have friendship with people for the sake of deen. وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. And it's literally Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ, and restrain yourself, bind yourself to be with, make yourself steadfast with who? الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ, those who call out to their Rabb, right, in the morning and the evening, seeking the expression of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And don't even lower your gaze from them. وَلَا تَعْدُ أَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, that lest it appear, and I'm translating this way because this is about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but for us I would translate it differently, but first for him, lest it outwardly resemble the gaze of a person who is seeking the attractions of this world. And for us it'll be that don't turn yourself away from those religious gatherings just because you want to surf on the screen. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا. And Allah Ta'ala here translated first for the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and don't obey those people, yani those leaders of the kuffar, of the Quraysh, who you want to bring them into deen so deen becomes strengthened. Don't listen, don't cater to them in any way whatsoever, because they're people whose hearts, Allah Ta'ala is saying in Quran that we, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, have made their hearts empty from the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're doing nothing other than wattaba hawahu, they're doing nothing other than following their own whims and fantasies and desires. Wakana amruhu furuta, and their whole matter and affair and their entire life and lifestyle is something that is completely of abandonment or disabandonment of everything that would pertain to deen and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also means to us, and I would translate for us again pertaining to screen. Screen is heartless, screen is soulless. Entertainment, news, what is it called? The TV shows, the seasons, the binge watching, the movies, all of that is heartless and soulless. And if we end up looking at that instead of spending time in religious gatherings, we will end up following, something that is purely of whim and fancy, of hawa. And then, to show you that not only did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam to have that company, this is Surah Kahf, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, Ghaliban, if I'm not mistaken, end of Surah Tawbah, explains how Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually did this in very famous verse, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رُسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. So, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that indeed a Nabi has come to you from your own selves, and it weighs heavily upon him the things that you do, and he is harisun alaykum. Allahu Akbar. It's ajib. Right? You can't even imagine this. This itself can be a source of solace. I remember 30 years ago when I met a Shaykh who was visiting from Syria in America, he's the first person who taught me this verse. And mashallah, the way he taught the verse was also very beautiful. It stayed with me, it's ajib. But it also, the verse itself really is such that, harisun alaykum is just ajib. Sometimes, I suggest, but, don't let it stray into maybe an exaggerated or false aqidah. But when you recite salawat and on Durud Sharif on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's very good to recite sometimes this verse in between, to recite a few verses. So if a person says, oh, I recite salawat, but I don't have feeling, just pause and say, harisun alaykum. Harisun alaykum. Remind yourself that how, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not unfeeling towards me. So how can I be reciting salawat in an unfeeling way towards him? What was his feeling towards me? Haris. It can't even, there's nothing in English that can explain this. People who know Urdu understand this word, right? And obviously people who know Arabic and Urdu understand this word. Harisun. That he is deeply, intensely desirous, longing, yearning for the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Ummah was the be-all and end-all of his heart. Allahu Akbar, Ya Allah. It's amazing. We think that, Ya Allah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had you, and he still wanted me. He had you as his Rabb, and you made him your Nabi. And in that special relationship, and you took him on Miraj, and you went past, Sidratul Muntaha, past the Kursi, past the Arsh, he went past where even Jibreel alayhi salam could go. And he came back, How? Harisun alaykum. He came back, still the Ummah was the be-all and end-all of his heart. Bil mu'mineen ra'ufun rahim. And with all believers, not bil muttaqeen, not bis sadiqeen, it's not the virtuous, the word virtue is not here. It's not virtuous believers, pious believers, righteous believers, nothing. Bil mu'mineen ra'ufun rahim. He's extremely tenderly kind and affectionate and merciful with all believers. Allahu Akbar. So we should be Ra'uf and Rahim with the Sunnah. We should be Ra'uf and Rahim with the deen that he brought to us and taught us from the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of you know then the hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he cries out for his ummah, ummati, ummati, in the one sense in his du'as in this world, but then also on the day of judgment, and that he won't want to enter Jannah until his ummah enters. It's just ajib if one was to go on to this. And that is no doubt his being our Nabi, but it also shows a model of friendship. So if I'm truly a friend with a person, I won't want to go in Jannah without them. If I'm truly a friend of a person, I will want them to go to Jannah as much as I want for my own self, for my own children to go to Jannah. This is again another hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that none of you truly believes until he or she loves for their fellow believer what they love for their own self. And that didn't mean house and car, that meant Jannah, that meant akhirah, that meant taqwa, that meant dhikr. So that is the friendship. That is the true friendship. In some ways, originally, Mawlana Ilyas Khandelvi Rahimahullah Ta'ala, Bani, the founder of Jamaat al-Tabligh, what he really wanted to do, and this is just my reading of the history, what he really wanted to do was to take that sohbah that was in the madrasa, that sohbah that was in the khanka, that fellowship and companionship that was in the madrasa and the khanka, and make it am. And he wanted that these people should come out of these institutes of Islamic learning and spirituality and go and mingle with all the people, because all the people need it. So to conclude then, that in order to be good when we're alone, and that is inshallah a later topic, we have to be good in our company. We need both, each one. Good solitude, good company, they feed the other. In fact, one without the other is insufficient. If you have a lot of good company and you still do bad things when you're alone, you're yourself undermining the effect of that good company. And if you're good when you're alone, but then you go out and you have bad company, you're undermining the effect of that good solitude. So the final rabt, the final thing today, right? Although, again, it would be a whole topic in of itself, but because we've talked about that in different ways before. But the best friend The best company is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the best company is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, all of this is to build up to that best solitude, which is called what we call khalwa. Sometimes it's called uzla. That to have solitude, retreat, sanctuary in the dhikr, the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all those verses that all of you would know well, and we've talked about ourselves also in many bayans. Huwa ma'akum ayna ma kuntum fa inni qareeb wa nahnu aqrabu ilayhi min habl al-warid. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'm with my servant when he remembers me. If he remembers me in his self, if he remembers me in a company, I remember him in a company. Better than that means in front of the assembly of angels. And if he remembers me in himself, I remember him in the sublimeness of my own self. Allahu Akbar. And that's why dhikr is so important. Because when your heart and your mind are for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when your heart and your thoughts are filled with the love and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is how then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does become your companion. You feel that huwa ma'akum ayna ma kuntum. This was a very beautiful teaching of deen, not just of quote unquote Sufism, but of deen, that I want to remember Allah ta'ala all the time. وَالذَّاكِرِينَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ Uzkurullaha dhikran kathira. That I want to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time, because when I remember him, he remembers me. Allah ta'ala said in Quran, Fadhkuruni adhkurkum. The more I remember him, the more he remembers me. The more I feel for him, the more I will feel what he already and always, his mercy and love that he has always expressed towards me. And then you will have the company of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would be the third topic then. So the dynamic power of virtuous company, and then the hidden power of being alone, and then the true blessings of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but all taken together in this context. Because I want to say about this last aspect, that if you don't have that dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have true loneliness. The real loneliness is not being alone physically. The real loneliness is my heart is empty of the feelings and thoughts for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I don't feel huwa ma'akum ayna ma kuntum, that I don't feel fa inni qareeb. Oh human, you were created to feel these things. Without feeling these things, you will feel lonely. You will feel a crippling, suffocating loneliness. And then in that loneliness, we sometimes make the mistake, fall into the fitna of filling that void with ghairullah, filling that void with the screen or the nafs or sin or fitna. And instead we need to choose to fill that void with the zikr and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to help us in that, we need to tap into this dynamic power of virtuous company, so that we can also become better when we're alone. And then inshallah we can reach a level of deen and dhikr where we never feel alone. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us tawfiq to do amal on this. May Allah ta'ala accept our efforts and our lives for this. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and protect us from any future mistakes, and forgive us for all our past mistakes on this. And may Allah ta'ala take away any and all loneliness of the heart. May He give our hearts only and all and every sukoon and itminan that comes from His ibadah, from His ita, from His worship and His obedience and His dhikr and His remembrance and His love. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us good company. May Allah ta'ala grant us true and sincere friends. May Allah ta'ala make us true and sincere to others. May Allah ta'ala make us a means of mutually benefiting and reinforcing others. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from every bad company. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq ya Rabbi Kareem. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.